So as a segue to our next section, remind you that the early suffragettes, the women in the early 1900s who fought for voting rights for American Indians, got their inspiration from the Iroquois Native American tribe in upstate New York, where descent was determined by the mother's side of the family. Women chose when and if the tribe went to war, and women chose the chief. So for those of you who were in my Cinderella course, you will note the complementary yin-yang parallels between redeeming wounded and distorted feminine and doing the same with masculine energies. Cinderella lost the good mother archetype at the hands of a constrictive masculine energy. Our prince had to deal with deadly wild man energy constricted by the mother and the absence of good enough fathering. Cinderella tapped into archetypal mothering feminine energy when the tree growing in her mother's grave, watered by her tears, which would be emotional involvement, had birds that gave her what she wished for. Our boy connected with the wild man through the pain in his finger from releasing the wild man from his cage. That led to the connection with archetypal masculine generative and creative energy in the wild man's golden well in the forest. So when Cinderella's interconnection and embodiment of positive archetypal feminine energy was sufficiently developed, she was seen at the ball by the prince looking for a bride in a kingdom without a queen. So when our prince had embodied enough wild man warrior energy in the battle to save the kingdom, he was seen at the contest winning the golden apples thrown out by the princess. The prince in Cinderella had to use a ruse to capture Cinderella's golden slipper and use it to identify her and bring the beauty of the inner value she had developed as a woman into full view and relationship with the outer world. And the king in our tale had his men wound the prince as he tried to escape for the third time. This wound was his identifier that brought his inner integrated wild man masculine positive energy into the outer world to be recognized. Both fairy tales involved connecting with our basic human nature as being part of nature and our sexuality. That deep connection with nature can move us to protecting and defending nature and the creative wildness in human nature. Both fairy tales ended with the union between the masculine and feminine, not a fusion, but in a complementary relationship as depicted by the yin-yang symbol. So the warrior archetype was associated with iron hounds in one of the four major archetypes, mature male, identified by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette in King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, Rediscovering the Archetypes of the Mature Masculine, published in 1919. On the dust cover of the book, it mentioned the emerging men's movement saying, quote, faced with the assertion that strong masculinity by necessity leads to patriarchal structures in society and relationships, increasing numbers of men are finding for the foundations of an authentic, revitalized masculinity. Again, to quote from the King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover, pioneering the men's movement, Jungian analyst Robert Moore, who often lectures with Robert Bly at the men's conferences, and Douglas Gillette, argued convincingly that mature masculinity is not abusive, domineering, or grandiose, but generative, creative, and empowering for self and others. Oh, should I hold that image up now? And you notice that the man, the male with the sun, lance is importing to the sun on the female moon's shield, and the moon is touching the moon symbol on the male shield. So to me, that's a yin-yang symbol. So the authors explore today's crisis in masculine identity and describe its two major causes: the disappearance of masculine rites of initiation and the patriarchy itself. They define the four mature male archetypes, the king as the energy of just and creative ordering, the warrior, the energy of self-disciplined, aggressive action, the magician, the energy of initiation and transformation, and the lover, the energy that connects men to others and the world, as well as the four immature patterns, divine child, hero, precocious child, and the Oedipal child. So Robert Moore and Robert Bly both emphasized the significance of adolescent initiations. And we saw how that was modeled by Iron Hans, the fairy tale. And I had a significant and Jungian type initiation around 1985 when I was 40 years old. My dear friend, the late Fred Gustafson, got together a group of men to do an initiation ceremony for his adopted Native American son when he reached puberty. Fred was a Jungian analyst, Lutheran minister, and sun dancer. Fred and son Aaron chose a group of 7 or 8 men that felt a bond, they felt a bond with, and that included ministers, an elderly businessman, and Robert Moore, who was in training at the Chicago Jungian Institute to become an analyst. We met at the summer woodland home of the businessman and designed the ceremonies on a Friday night. Each man contributed one ceremonial element, like how to make masks. My contribution, which concluded the weekend events, was to show the group, including Aaron, how to use the yarrow stalk method to consult the I Ching for guidance and understanding what the initiation events had meant to us. Each member of the group participated in casting the lines in the hexagram, and I guided with the interpretation of the hexagram. And what a remarkable hexagram we got for an initiation ceremony. Hexagram 49, Revolution Molting. The Wilhelm Baines translation says, quote, "The Chinese character for this hexagram means in its original sense an animal pelt, which is changed in the course of the year by molting. From this word is carried over to apply to the moltings in political life, the great revolutions connected with changes in government." So the upper trigram, Tui, lake, the younger daughter, is above the older daughter, Li, fire, in the lower trigram. And quote, "The influences are in actual conflict, and the forces combat each other like fire and water, lake, each trying to destroy each other, hence the idea of revolution." And again, quoting from Wilhelm, "Times change, and with them their demands. Thus the seasons change in the course of the year. In the world cycle, there are also spring and autumn in the life of peoples and nations, and these call for social transformations." So the I Ching wonderfully illustrates the Jungian concept of the archetype per se and the archetypal image, the mirrors on the disco ball that I have mentioned before. In inquiring about the significance of the initiation ceremony that our group did, we got illustrations using natural elements like animal pelt molts, shown here, of the opposition of water and fire, and the changes of the seasons. At the human level, we saw conflict between younger and older sisters, and the revolutions in political life and world cycles in the lives of peoples and nations, all reflections of the same theme, revolution. So commentary in Wilhelm continues, "Man masters the seasonal changes in nature by noting their regularity and marking off the passages of time accordingly. In this way, order and clarity appear in apparently chaotic changes of the seasons, and man is able to adjust himself in advance of the demands of different times." End of quote. So we are talking about initiation as an appropriate recognition and, quote, marking off the passage of time, unquote, to make the appropriate adjustments to meet the new demands in a man's life as he goes from boyhood to manhood. So this was one of many experiences that I've had through the years since 1975 using the I Ching that demonstrate this incredible relevancy of the answers in the Jing to the questions that are put to it. So it's not something I believe in. It's been my experience that it works. In the end, the men in our initiation group felt more initiated than Fred's son because none of us had been in such powerful ceremonies as we created and participated in. We had deep discussions about our lives as men and what it is to be a modern man in relation to strong women, namely our wives. So years later, I had the rich experience of leading a small men's group where we had similar deep discussions together with doing a sweat lodge and a group I Ching reading. So let's put Iron Hans, the warrior archetype, and male initiations within the broader context of a man's life using the constructs that in Murray Stein's excellent book, Men Under Construction, Challenges and Prospects. Stein describes individuation as a psychological process that moves sequentially in stages in a pattern of life cycles. Erik Erikson proposed a theory of psychosocial development summarized in this chart. Infancy, which is 0 to 1 years, issues are trust versus mistrust. Early childhood, 1 to 3 years, issues are autonomy versus shame and doubt. Play age, 3 to 6 years, issues are initiative versus guilt. Guilt may develop when one is unsuccessful or boundaries are crossed. School age, 7 to 9 years, issues are industry versus inferiority. Adolescence, 12 to 18 years, issues identity versus confusion. Early adulthood, 19 to 29 years, issues intimacy versus isolation. Middle age, 30 to 64 years, issues generativity versus stagnation. And old age, 65 onwards, issues integrity versus despair. So each stage, like childhood and adolescence, is delineated by certain prominent issues, but these issues are re-engaged again and again throughout our lives, hopefully gaining more consciousness, insight, and freedom, that is integration, with each cycle as we develop a greater sense of our true self. The adolescent stage, for example, is marked by angst and uncertainty about who we are and what we will become. But identity formation begins as small children and is reformed in middle life and old age, as we are always a work in progress. So this is Stein's diagram of the stages of life in relationship to the archetypes dominating each stage and the prominent male position associated with each stage and archetype. So notice the overlap between each stage in the sequence of childhood, young adult, middle, late adulthood, and old age, with adolescence as the overlap between childhood and the young adult. The archetypal sequence is mother, father, anima, self, and God. And the male's experience is that of being the son, husband, father, hero, missionary, and sage. So here is the spiral arrangement of the archetypal dominance of the life cycle, better illustrating how we cycle through the same basic issues over and over again, gaining greater insight and understanding with each pass. As an overview, in the initial phase of a man's development from infancy to childhood, the child's consciousness is more or less enveloped in the maternal atmosphere, a period of containment and nurturance. And then adolescent begins the lifelong progress of separation from around age 12 and lasts until adulthood has been solidly established. The adult stage is dominated by the father as framed by the personal and cultural patriarchal attitude. So the midlife third stage begins around age 35 and lasts until around age 50 and is dominated by the anima or the soul. The fourth stage, from approximately age 50 to 70, and Marie says, is characterized by the emergence and increasing consciousness of the self as an important psychic factor, end of quote. This gradually moves into the late stage individuation where spirituality and the God problem become the main issues. So there are typical challenges for male identity in each stage. The mother's boy in stage 1 must be freed to move on to being the father's son in stage 2, often marked by various forms of initiation. He may become a father himself. The midlife challenge is to identify with the hero to rescue his soul, the anima, from domination and extinction by the patriarchal world of collective values. The energy behind the prince's heroic deeds in Iron Hans would have to be applied with Ares' passion to be fierce, honest, and clear in developing his unique life and his soul in relationship to the patriarchal collective values and his persona. So this midlife position is also the conflict and the opposition between the anima or one soul and the persona. So the persona would be tuned into the collective values and trying to meet them and so on. But to the extent that that is contrary to your true self, that's what the anima represents and shakes things up often at midlife, so that one starts to pull away from identity with the collective values to one's unique identity in one's soul. The missionary position that Marie talks about in later adulthood is about finding a mission in the world that directs his vision outward beyond himself to embrace collective and cultural issues with significant engagement with the world. Movement into old age shifts identity to the sage as he becomes a wisdom figure for others by engaging religious questions of ultimate meaning. So I will stay within the gestalt of the fairy tale by looking in greater details at the subphases and problems that can develop with the father and mother archetypes. So Iron Hans had us look at what the I Ching called work on what has been spoiled by the mother, and the key being under the mother's pillow in the fairy tale. And I discussed in the last lecture the role of the hero in relationship to the anima. So the mother's boy in phase 1 ideally feels loved and admired by her totality. The personal mother symbolizes the total surrounding environment of the mother in the sense of being a containing and nurturing context. The actual mother, why don't you go back to the previous slide? Yeah. The actual mother is the infant's first experience with the world, and attachment issues lead either to a foundation of trust or mistrust in the world that can persist throughout one's life. Poor attachment leads to deep-seated anxiety towards people and the world as object and object relations theory. The terrible twos are the first significant attempt to separate from the mothers. So recognition at age 3 or 4 of significant physical differences between himself and mother intensifies the separation. Ambivalence on the mother's part can create a conflict if it's okay to leave the mother and how far one can stray and feel attached, what Winnicott called being alone in the presence of. An anxious mother, anticipating separation too soon, may begin to take distance too early and leave the boy with a feeling of insecurity and abandonment. Stein illustrated these issues first with a man with an absent mother, because she had been heavily medicated and hospitalized with severe mental illness during his early childhood. When Stein worked with him, he was studying for the priesthood and having trouble staying focused. He was sexually underdeveloped, had alcohol and eating addictions, and engaged in excessive fantasizing and daydreaming. So in one session with Stein, he had a vision of Our Lady, the Catholic Mother Mary, offering him food and nurturance, a symbolic compensation for the absence of a real mother. He remained in the mother, as Mary said, by projecting this archetypal image onto religious objects and institutions. He may remain in this archetypal refuge until a way can be found to exit from it and enter into relationships with individuals and communities. So I had a client like that years ago who was a priest, and his mother was a prostitute and would have men in the room next to his bedroom when he was a kid. And what helped him survive was a statue of the Virgin Mary. And like I said, he became a priest, and a good one at that. And this illustrates such an important concept in Jungian psychology, the fact that the unconscious can compensate in an archetypal way with the symbolic imagery for what in one's personal life can be a disastrous situation. So Stein recorded the case of a 33-year-old male client who had an ambivalent mother, leaving the son feeling completely stuck in life at every level. While he was constitutionally very creative and artistic, he had been unable to engage with the world in an effective way, being cocooned from it. He demanded a woman be completely virginal while constantly trying to prove that she was a whore. So Mother harbored a deep hostility toward men because of her wounding by men and patriarchal bias in society. She drew her son into her tortured marital drama with a deeply troubled and conflicted relationship with the boy's father. The son became both a male ally of mom and an enemy of dad, with mom almost incestuously close at times and distant and murderously rageful at others. This unpredictability destabilized him and created turbulent relationships, especially with women. Father, as a designated enemy, couldn't help the son trapped at home with a frightening, unstable mother. Father was probably envious of the son, who seemed to have access to mother's intimacy while he was locked out, leading to a negative and hostile relationship between father and son. So Stein's third case was about what he called a faulty mirror mother. A 50-year-old successful professional man, married with 3 children, was unable to see himself as a man. He had no sense of his penis and couldn't see it in a mirror. His strong-willed mother dominated his family growing up, while father was weak and passive by comparison. As an adult, he looked intently at other men whom he admired, trying to find in himself the qualities that attracted him. He despaired by not being able to find those qualities within himself. Fault mirroring from the mother can come from one who can love the boy as a cute, cuddly infant, but being unable to positively mirror and enjoy his maleness as he grows older. She may ignore or suppress acknowledgement of his sex and his male qualities as they appear in childhood. She thus rejects his masculinity, possibly because of her own difficulties with sexuality and relationships with men. The boy will have difficulty identifying with his own masculine parts, but be without difficulty identifying with other parts of himself, such as his intellect. I will use an example from a female that illustrates this point of a faulty mirror by the father of his daughter. And I'd mentioned this in one of the lectures I gave in China, I can't remember which one, but a woman in a 1-hour dream meeting with me presented a dream of a chicken that got its head broken, its neck broken, when the back door of the car was slammed. That was the image. And the associations, it was the family car. And I asked her when the family owned that car, and she told me what period it was, and that period included her adolescence. And then I said, well, what about the feminine as a chicken might have been damaged by the family? She said she had been the apple of her father's eye until she hit puberty, and then her father rejected her. In other words, he could not mirror her developing femininity. It was too much for him. And that blow to her identity as a woman was depicted by the chicken that got its neck broke when the door was slammed on it, the door of the family car. I continue to be amazed after all these years by the power of dream imagery and how much they can reveal. So our next mother is the guilt and shame inducing mother. And that creates an atmosphere. She creates an atmosphere of guilt and shame around typical masculine traits that her son might display, such as aggressiveness, independence, and explorativeness. This mother's boy may become a paragon of gentleness and goodness that women will like, but not fall in love with because he lacks basic masculine qualities. He remains in the mother because of the terrible guilt he would feel if he departed. He will tend to stay close to the female-dominated house and is often service-oriented in behavior and career. Then we come to the perfect mother, who, on the other hand, permits the son to attach to her and gives him enough nurturance and mirroring to keep him from discovering her negative side. Usually, she accomplishes this by encouraging him to project the negative feminine outwardly onto someone else, which produces a split for the son between the good woman, the mother, and the bad woman, the other women, creating the classic mother-bound son. He sees his mother as totally positive, virginal, pure, and good, and other women as much lesser than his mother, problematic, sexual, witch-like, and so on. He often remains a bachelor and cares for his widowed mother or cherishes an ideal memory of her. The father is usually rather inconsequential, weak, or absent, or thoroughly denigrated by the perfect mother. The son feels he must stay with and protect mother, feeling guilty about any possible relationship with another woman. Typically, she encourages this sense of responsibility. If he has to marry, she encourages marriage to a weak, unchallenging woman. So, having now looked at mothers who are absent, ambivalent, faulty mirrors, guide and shame inducing, or perfect, let's consider a good enough mother. As Stein describes her, she is not the perfect mother because she gives her son her real self, gradually at a rate he can handle. She is devoted to nurturing in the beginning, but in time she weans him, allowing some distance, permits him to see her anger, her imperfections, her negative side, in short, to see her more or less as she really is. Secondly, she maintains the strength of the early bonding in an appropriate way, which will stand him in good stead throughout his later development. In this, she fosters his ability to achieve intimacy and trust in relationships, especially with women. Third, she confers on her son a sense of self-confidence, which he can take with him when he leaves her. And if a man is able to later count on his inner good enough mother, his ego will be well grounded and his sense of self-worth will enable him to proceed through life with resiliency, confidence, and the ability to relate successfully to the world. Stein describes the gift of the good enough mother as that of a man that can be enough at home in his body and in the world to feel and understand his impulses and instincts. So mother has bestowed the confidence he can meet his needs and gratify his desires with success. Therefore, he will know when he is hungry and can seek something to eat. He will know when he wants and needs intimacy and can seek out a suitable partner. He can feel his anger or sadness and act on them if necessary. He can be active, even aggressive, when a situation calls for it. He can destroy in order to create. When confronted with negative features in life, he is able to protect himself with his wits and his knowledge of the world. This type of mother has enabled him to leave the parental household because he has the basis for self-subsistence. He can then move into the wider world and enter the father circle of career, development of skills, and the challenges of society. He will be able to express his ambitions and learn how to relate to the expectations and requirements of the prevailing culture. So the second stage of development, what Stein calls the father circle, and that should be the stage of the husband and father, refers not exclusively to the actual father, but to the fathers in general, such as teachers, ministers, politicians, and other leaders, including women with a patriarchal caste and attitude. The masculine side dominates the ego and persona. The persona shows itself to others as a man in his dress and culturally accepted behaviors. The father, a loving and instructing representative of the masculine principle, functions as a bridge to the outer world of work and taxes, for example, and helps him adapt to collective expectations. So mother initially is the entire world of the infant, which gradually becomes differentiated and divided as discrete objects begin to emerge in consciousness. The child begins to discriminate within the inner world between good and bad, reactions to the environment like something that is nurturing and warm or persecutory and attacking. The introduction of the father leads to a conscious differentiation between woman and man, feminine and masculine, inner and outer, leading to a fourfold character structure of consciousness, good versus bad, inner versus outer. The distinction between inner and outer becomes the distinction between fantasy, inner, and reality, outer. The latter yields two types of thinking, imagination and directed thinking. This differentiation also occurs in women, but development diverges because girls tend to go on to identify with the mother and the boys with the father. Very generally speaking, the girl sustains a sense of continuity in her identity and tends to remain more inward, imaginative, and close to the mother, while a little boy experiences a rupture in his world and he parts with his mother, and as he tends to move outward into the world and to be near his father and toward directed thinking. In optimum male development, a mother introduces her son to his father and creates an atmosphere of inclusion that brings the father into what was the dyadic world of mother and infant. Ideally, she presents the father as a positive figure and not as a threat to the intimacy between her and her son. In doing so, she helps her son to idealize his father as a figure of pride and high esteem whose importance casts an aura of value and on the family as a whole. The son's native masculine tendencies lead him to identify with the father and strive to imitate him, generating ambition in the son, leading to further personality development. This slide actually is relevant to this section. So the son outgrows the personal father in early to mid-adolescence after discovering some deficiencies and becoming disillusioned with him. Idealizations get passed on to other male figures like teachers, coaches, and so on, who seem greater than the father as another step toward releasing the son from the personal father and taking him into the broader world. So the father plays an important role in initiating the son into manhood, extending his importance that started as the first other in the infant's life. The idealized father seems to be bigger, stronger, smarter, and with a wider social circle than the mother. The father eventually allows himself to be de-idealized, which can happen suddenly by something that is said or seems to disappoint the son. This is the second step in initiation, loss through betrayal of the ideal. In the identification stage, the son learns to claim his phallic power and feel his masculine strength, later connecting this to his creativity and fertility. In the second step of initiation, betrayal, the son is released from the bondage to the father, an essential experience to prevent the son from being forever bound to the father. This was the prince being taken from the first to the second kingdom. Betrayal must come at the right time, and the son must have the wherewithal to grow from the experience and move on into independence. If it comes too early or too consistently, a negative father complex will develop, and with it, an aversion to all paternal authority. All initiations have an element of risk and possible catastrophe. The outcome of the initiation must be a man's sense of his inner resilience, strength, and reliability to deal with trials without collapsing. So the initiated man has incorporated the masculine in himself as an inner structure, feeling his phallus and its strength as part of himself, and feeling his strength and prowess as a man. He can use father figures or strong masculine images as points of reference. He is able to use his literal and symbolic phallus in his life and can therefore stand his ground against other powerful male figures who challenge him. This was metaphorically portrayed when the prince in Iron Hans wiped out the invading army. He is self-confident and can be a father, manager, boss, or leader. He is neither dependent on his mother, from whom his father helped to free him, nor on his father, from whom he is freed through initiation. The uninitiated man tends to stand behind or outside the circle of masculine authority, as if not quite pulled out of the mother world into the world of the father. He has difficulty feeling his own phallic or masculine strength and shows either too much or too little ambition. He tends to look outside himself for male power figures to identify with, putting himself in the service of powerful male figures or identifying with powerful corporations or institutions. He is unable to idealize his own work or prowess. So one type of uninitiated man seeks protection as a follower, ever asking for advice and looking for support from strong men, in constant search for a father figure to hide behind. And this is a scene from The Godfather, and that's Marlon Brando playing the head of a mafia group. By contrast, the other type is rebellious against male authority figures, asserting seemingly independence that actually is counterdependence in that it needs the other in order to stand upright. This type is unable to idealize a mentor. He approaches potential male figures negatively, often with anger, or he falls immediately into competition with him. This man ends up being a loner. Stein adds that most men are located somewhere along a spectrum of initiation, which takes place throughout life in the world of the father, with the father having been the first initiator. So now we've come to the last segment of our course, where we examine the role of the father, particularly as it affects a man's transition out of the world of the mother into the world of the father. We will look at fathers that are absent, abandoning, Oedipal, or too good. So the absent father lacks the father effect in the psyche because he may be physically absent or was simply non-functioning in the family. If the mother was good enough, the son may have a good boat, but lacking a rudder. He has no sense of direction. Having not idealized the father, there is no ambition to succeed in the world, therefore missing the sense of mastery and accomplishment when ambitions are fulfilled. The psyche may compensate with an archetypal divine father image too far removed from reality to be modified and impossible to achieve. If a task is good enough to attempt, it is too great to be able to accomplish. If accomplishable, it's beneath him and not worth the effort. There are underlying problems of grandiosity, low self-esteem, and inability to master the small steps that lead to great achievements. So what Murray calls the abandoning father may be physically present, but tends to leave the son with the mother. He has difficulty allowing the son to idealize him. He is often a puer eternus, eternal boy, living in a world of fantasies and possibilities, and often too busy with his own projects to attend to his son. He may be distant and cold and not expect anything from his son. An A or a C in school makes no difference to him. He is often negligent, possibly alcoholic. What Murray calls the Oedipal father tends to be extremely oppressive, putting his sons in positions where they cannot grow, like holding him under his thumb in the family business. The sons often develop a negative father complex projected onto men of authority in their lives and are likely to be rebellious and attempt to overthrow the father. The Senex father type is distant, cold, and repressive. How'd you like to have a dad like this guy? And finally, we have the too good father who is one-sidedly positive and shows no shadow to his son. He doesn't betray the son, but always accommodates and protects him. This has the effect of the son not wanting to leave the home because it's safe, and he is unsure of his ability to survive in the real world. He is prevented from testing himself and establishing a sense of self-worth. This is often the case in wealthy families, and the son remains father-bound. That's all, folks. Thank you. And if you have some residual questions about Cinderella, the previous course, you can bring that into.
Jane's question is about the last category of the father, is the too good father. And you talk about the impact from the too good father to the son. So she is curious about what will be the impact of the too good father to the daughter.
It could be kind of the same as for the young man, that her father will be her idol, and it'll be hard for her to find probably a man in the world that could be as successful as her father, because most young men will be starting off building a practice and establishing themselves. So nothing will be as safe and secure as her father animus, if you will. And that would be covered in some detail in Verena Kost's book called Mothers and Sons and Fathers and Daughters. I used a lot of material from that, I think, in my second lecture about mothers and sons. But that's another ballgame, fathers and daughters. So another way you could think about it is that the animus in the woman would be something that gets her out into the world, the determination and the persistence in developing a profession, that sort of thing. And what had been in the past, the animus, if you will, for some image of the woman being out in the world and so on, now, because so many women have become like astronauts and doctors and all that, a lot of what had been animus can now be seen as shadow figures or positive self figures for young women. If a woman's shadow in a positive sense, it could be like an astronaut or a doctor, that she could be envious of women that are like that, that would be part of her shadow.
So there's a phenomenon that, for some boys who is really aggressive, and in Qiao Hang's mind, and she thinks it as he is controlled by the evil part, or maybe by the wild man in the fairy tale. So she's wondering, is there any practical way we can use in our daily life to help such burst out a child to control, that is to dealing with his aggression, and to show he's a loving and a good part instead of him.
Those can be the kind of issues you can run into if there's an absent father or an abandoning father, those types of fathers that I mentioned. And we see a lot of that in a lot of the African-American families here in America, where there's a single mother trying to raise boys, maybe even a teenage mother, and there's no father in the house for various reasons, the way the welfare system was set up. So the child doesn't have kind of a strong masculine figure to kind of be firm with him and model what good masculine behavior is, if you will. It can be difficult for the single mother to try to control that or manage that child. Control is not the right word. And it can get amplified if there's like a divorce situation, and the son can be really upset, so then he can get angry. It's important to try to know what the dynamics are that are making the son angry and aggressive. And like I said, if it's like a divorce situation, and maybe the mother is really negative about the father or ex-husband, and the child is really torn between the connection with the mother and the father, the way that he's going to express it, like I said, is either being angry or aggressive and so on. So you always have to look at the underlying dynamics and the family construct. Or it could be something that's happening outside of the home that has disturbed the boy, and you have to find out what that could be too. And of course, what I was presenting in the lectures is that there are natural differences between boys and girls, and a mother may have trouble with boys being a little naturally more aggressive, and it can easier to anger sometimes than little girls. And if she has trouble with that and tries to constrain the boy, it can make it even more difficult. And that's where we get to the key being under the mother's pillow. I've often found that women can be pretty intimidated by men's anger, whereas men angry with other men, it's like that's kind of a more natural thing to deal with.
Another question is, if the father shows resistance and rejection to the adolescent daughter, so what will the impact could be?
The particular example I used with the chicken and the car door, it really affects the woman's sense of her sexual appeal to men. She didn't get the mirroring from the father of what a kind of a developed young woman is. That affects male relationships. Another example I'd used, I think it was in the Cinderella course, was with a woman that I worked with, pretty severe case. She was hospitalized in her late teens, got 18 electroshock treatments. The father had blamed her for the breakup of the marriage, and we worked for about 9 months very intensively with dreams. And one of the most revealing dreams after we'd worked a long time was she dreamt that she saw a father pushing his daughter on a swing. And she thinks to herself in the dream, that was my problem. I was in love with my father like that little girl. And then she recounted something about her childhood where she had been the apple of her father's eye until she was 4 years old. And then when she began to assert herself, she was a rather assertive woman as an adult. When she began to assert herself, her father couldn't accept that and really started to get hostile toward her. So even at that early age, it was important for the father to accept her as a kind of a developing independent person. And especially being a woman in what had been a very patriarchal family, the father couldn't accept that. So it's important to be mirrored and loved by the father and the mother. Important to realize as well that there are some subtle but important differences between the father and the mother mirroring and loving.
So since you just list the categories of the father type, so is there any possibility that they coexist for some of them at the same time?
Or a blending of those categories?
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Those are like kind of pure examples. But yeah, I think in every individual, in our parenting styles, we exhibit all those elements in one form or another in various strengths. But hopefully the good enough fathering and the good enough mothering will be the dominant elements that will come through. And being the father of two daughters and a son, my youngest, the son, is now 42, and it's not easy raising children. It's not easy bringing a child into adulthood. And you're always going to make mistakes, and there are things that you regret, and you just hope that before you die, that everything will come out well enough.
So this is a further question about the father's relationship to the adolescent daughter, you know. So just due to the sexual appealing to the father, and makes the father show avoidance to the daughter because of the incest taboo, you know. So and the question is, and how should the father build up relationships with the adolescent daughter and to benefit her personal development and future relationship with men?
It's certainly by recognizing her femininity without coming across like a dirty old man. And it can be little stuff like saying, "Oh, that dress looks nice on you," or, just little comments, or, you really like the way you've done your hair up, or whatever. It's important for the father to recognize the daughter's femininity. Many one-sentence stories I got in Zurich, and it's the extreme of this, is that the father is to bring the daughter to the point of consummation, at which point he passes her off to a man, her husband. That would be the extreme. It's like this real closeness and acceptance of her femininity and so on, and sexuality. And then, okay, now you're ready for a man, for a husband. And I might mention, in terms of an unusual type of father-daughter relationship, is my own daughter, my second daughter. I had a dream that I was standing in a white hospital hallway, and a nurse came out of a hospital room and said, "It's a girl, and her name is Rebecca." And my wife and I hadn't been thinking about having another child at that point. And I discussed the dream with my analyst, and she talked about it. Oh, it was a developing anima. And then a couple of weeks later, we found out my wife was pregnant. Of course, it was a girl, and you always have to choose a name for whatever sex your child is going to be. And because of that dream, we decided to go with Rebecca instead of Elizabeth. I think of it kind of synchronistically. She had such a presence. She turned out to be just a beautiful child and quite a beautiful young woman. It's like she had to announce herself within a few weeks after my wife being pregnant. So whatever you want to think about synchronicity and so on, it really gave me a lot of things to think about. We still have a very deep connection to this day. I think she's now, hang on, 45 years old. So I want to thank you for inviting me to teach the course on Cinderella and on Iron Hans. Those are two of my favorite fairy tales. And I hope you got a sense of how you can work with fairy tales and why they are so important in training us as Jungians on how to work with archetypal and symbolic material and storylines, and see how they apply to the clients we work with. But that kind of fairy tale training is really important when it comes to working with dreams, especially those powerful and more bigger archetypal type dreams.
Thank you,
So
Dennis.
thank you, Coco. Thank you for being the translator. I always enjoy working with you.
Me too. I'm honored.
Mhm.
谢谢大家。Thank you,
So-
Dennis. We benefit a lot and look
Oh,
forward to the next series if you like.